Terry Fontenot turn down. What?
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Jarvis Davis, Aaron Freeman, and Tori McElhaney. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And the Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Falcons are on a break until July 27th, but hey, we are not. So we will talk expectations for each position group and position battles on the defensive side of the ball, along with special teams. Then we'll talk about whether or not there's an OG or young gun in Flowery who deserves flowers. But first, let's talk about the Falcons maybe losing out on more than just one pick, Jarvis. The Chicago Bears reportedly called the Atlanta Falcons to see if they could swap their number 9 pick with the Falcons pick at 8 and give the Falcons a likely 2024 fourth round pick. Reportedly, allegedly, the answer from the Falcons was no. Now, if this report is accurate, can you make it make sense?
Kind of. Because here's the thing. Like, the one thing that we know about, the general manager in the Chicago Bears, for some reason, his name is escaping me right now. When you think about, what he's been able to do these past couple of years, just from wheeling and dealing, trading down, Ryan Post. There you go. Thank you. Wheeling and dealing, moving up and down the draft. The only thing that I feel like I kind of understand where Fontenot is coming from is the fact that, this dude made trade up and then, get an offer that he can't refuse and then trade back. And they come up and snag, Michael Penix, a team, because there were definitely teams that were very interested in him because we know how to run on quarterbacks, how that went in the draft, top half of the draft. So you just don't know what's going to happen, especially if you have your guy. You know exactly who you want to draft. I kind of get it. So now, on the other side of that, if it's Les Snead, cool. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll pull the trigger. Or, because Raheem Morris with his dealings we have with him, and not to say that the Falcons will trade with the Saints. If Terry Fontenot saying, you know what, hey, the Saints saying trying to trade up, he can understand that. He'll know exactly who they're going to pick, and he wouldn't have any worries. So I just think that, just from based off the precedent that Ryan Poles has set, I want to pull the trigger on that one either.
Yeah, and that's understandable. And and listen, Aaron, we find out as time goes on little nuggets, right, that keep building on storylines and help us to make things make sense. Just like the Michael Penix Jr. pick itself, as time went on and we found out more information, it began to make more sense, right? So I think there are ways to make this makes sense as well. On the surface, a fourth rounder, and knowing that you still might be able to pick out a gem, knowing what Terry Fontenot is able to do in seeing raw talent that can be developed, you do say on the surface, hey, why not get that pick, especially because now you're at the point where you've lost a fifth rounder. But ultimately speaking, I feel like at some point we're going to find out a few more nuggets that'll make this make sense.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, T. When it comes to the draft, I think the more we know, the more I think we realize that every draft pick, probably you turn down some sort of trade offer at some point in time, trade up, trade down, like, because these teams are constantly in communication with each other, not only on draft day, draft night, but in the days and weeks and sometimes even months leading up to the draft. And so I think ultimately it boils down to something that Jarvis said, where the Falcons had a conviction when it came to Michael Penix. We know that there were other offers to try to trade up, and I don't know if it's fair to single out the Falcons in this case, but I think, the thing that we've learned over the years where there's been multiple studies with the draft is the biggest flaw in NFL teams drafting is that they think they're actually good at drafting, and history coaches that they're actually not that good at drafting. And so when you get an offer like this, and again, this is not meant to be a knock on the Falcons, because I think most NFL teams, with the few exceptions of those teams that are constantly like trading down, like the Ravens are, but most teams sort of think like, oh yeah, we definitely know that we're going to hit on this player. We have a conviction on this player. He's going to be great. And even getting another swing at the bat later in the draft is not going to make up for hitting on this one individual pick. And I think that really just kind of explains where the Falcons were coming from. They really had conviction on Michael Penix. And, you know, in the long run, when you hit on a franchise quarterback, like no one cares. Who's the Bills general manager who mentioned that at the combine, where it's like someone asked him about, you know, what was a risk in trading up for Josh Allen. And he was like, look, if we miss on this pick, I'm not going to be here to face the consequences. And if we hit on this pick, no one's going to care. So I think that's basically the mindset that Terry Fontenot and probably most NFL GMs have when it comes to stuff like this.
Yeah, and Tori, I feel like this is just going to be that one until maybe a year or 2 or 3 down the road when Michael Penix Jr. takes over this offense. There's always going to be some nugget that goes back to, and yes, here's more information and intel on what happened in the 2024 draft with the Falcons and the pick of Michael Penix. Like this storyline is going to keep evolving, and they're going to keep being layers to it. But I think, again, even with whatever comes out, I feel like it's all still going to make sense, and it's all still going to turn out to be the right move and the right moves for the Falcons in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking back at the draft too, and also hearing from Terry and from Raheem about what the draft plan looked like on that night and how things fell, to me, it's almost, I almost think that their priority, or not priority is not the right word, but I think a lot of their focus was getting back into the first round. And not necessarily, I always think that they were not really willing to budge on number 8, because I truly don't think that they thought that they would have a shot to get Michael Penix Jr. beyond 8. Because I do think that they were very worried about, like, people were calling and asking about the number 8 overall pick in order to potentially get a quarterback. And so I think that there was this worry that if you drop below 8 and you don't use that number 8 pick, you don't get Michael Penix Jr., who we have talked about, they had such a conviction on, and they knew from go that this is a guy they really wanted a chance to get. I also think that simultaneously, while all of this is happening, they're obviously, and this is something Terry said about, we're making calls to get back in the first round. He was like, we called every team from 9 to 32 to try and get back into the first round. I think that was such a significant point of conversation within that war room, just based off of what Terry was able to disclose to us that night, that I think you can't talk about that number 8 overall pick and what was happening behind the scenes without also talking about the calls that were being made for 9 to 32. And how much the Falcons wanted to get back up into the first round. And ultimately, they never got a yes to be able to do that. So I think all of everything that we're saying can and maybe is true. But I think that piece of it, I think that maybe people should pay a bit more attention to in the context of what would have happened if they would have traded out at number 8.
Indeed. And, you know, like you guys said, but I'll just still ask the question as well, JD, with the recent loss of that 5th round draft pick in 2025, of course, that the NFL levied as a result of tampering, and kind of knowing in the back of your mind you were going to lose at least 1 pick, does that at all make it even a tougher pill to swallow to find out, hey, they could have gotten that 4th rounder but didn't?
I don't think so, because here's the thing. I feel like there's a reason why, you know, they doubled and tripled down on the defensive line / edge position, right? Because you get to a point where we know there has been a glaring need for this team for quite some time, right? Somebody can be able to get to the passer consistently, you know, and that's something that they've been sorely missing. So if you understand that, hey, I'm about to lose a draft pick, so I know I got to double down on the position that I have. That's a need, right? So that's why I feel like we saw that, and I feel like Terry did plan for it in that moment, right? Going forward, because I don't see this being that big of a deal. Obviously, the Falcons have had some success drafting in that round, right? You know, but ultimately, I feel like, you know, Terry has done a pretty solid job. Now we got to see what the results of those are, right? He did a solid job of planning for the future on that side of the football, in that big need piece right there. But I understanding that there's not going to be too much of a miss of that draft pick, I feel, going forward.
I also think I would add too that like you don't know if you're going to lose a draft pick in that moment. Like you can't play to this idea of, oh, maybe we'll lose a draft pick, maybe we'll have it. Like you got to just focus on what's in front of you and what's now. And I think honestly, like that's where I come into to kind of like push back on the question of like, oh, like hindsight's always going to be 2020. You're always going to be like, oh, they could have used that pick because now they've lost one and it could have been, would have been, should have been. But at the end of the day, if you're Terry Fontenot in that war room on that night, you know what you have to work with right now. And the Falcons, honestly, in the Terry Fontenot regime, haven't really been key players in their trades of using their own draft capital for future drafts. They're very much we'll give you our third and we'll give you our fifth or we'll give you our fourth in this year, not next year. So I think that's honestly that they very much play to their understanding of what they have in the moment and not necessarily worrying too far in advance of like, oh, maybe we will, maybe we won't have this draft pick.
Yeah, and you have to be kind of encouraged and excited about the fact that there were several pundits whose names we will not mention here that were acting like the sky is falling, the world is over, the Falcons are going to lose everything. And the fact that, to your point, Tori, Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris did not buy into that or allow that to cloud their judgment. I think that's a great call on the fact that they're very even keeled and they understand overall what the assignment was to just get it right with what you have in front of you here for 2024. When we come back, we'll continue to talk expectations for each position group and position battles on the defensive side of the ball, along with special teams in the deep dive. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. It's summertime, at least almost. I think we're about 5 days away, but that does mean that baseball, the NBA Finals, and more are here, and you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit the one out of the park. So think about it. The Boston Celtics are trying their darndest not to go back to Dallas. They hope to close out on the Dallas Mavericks tonight. There's a still minus 3,500 on the betting props for them to win it all, plus 1,400 for the Dallas Mavs to win it all. And as far as the Finals MVP, well, it keeps going back and forth. But our local product, Jaylen Brown, is minus 230 to win it all. And in all likelihood, if Jaylen Brown has a good night, then those Boston Celtics will hoist the 18th trophy tonight. Jason Tatum at a plus 220, Luka Doncic at a plus 1,400, and get this, Drew Holiday has entered the chat at plus 3,800. So you can visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to make those bets, and a big win to your summer bucket list can be added. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on, because FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. All right, guys. So we started this conversation last week with the Falcons offense, and we're going to continue it today to talk about position groups one by one and kind of who started to separate themselves during OTAs, or if you see where there might be a position battle. So let's start with, and we kind of touched on it a little bit last week, but we can deep dive a little bit more today, Aaron. Talk about the defensive ends. Where do you see that group in terms of anyone who stood out for you or separated themselves from OTAs? What you've seen that maybe you liked a little bit from any of those players at that position, or if, dare I say it, there are any position battles at the defensive end position?
Well, as we discussed last week, OTAs and whatnot are really just not really geared up for the trenches guys that really stand out in a ways. It's really all about, the quarterbacks and the skill guys. So I think we're going to see more of some of these guys kind of emerge once we get to training camp, and, they actually can, hit some people, put some pads on, do trench stuff. So I'm very intrigued to see how these young defensive ends sort of, stack in terms of the rotation. You have two draft picks and Rukaroro and Brandon Dorlus. Where do they sort of fit in? What exactly role is Zach Harrison going to have this year? I think a lot of people are sort of speculating, does he play inside? Does he play outside? And in sort of like, that's kind of the genius of the Falcons, where they have a bunch of sort of versatile pieces that they can just kind of figure out, like, okay, who are just, we talk about it with the offensive line, like, okay, it's just like get the best 5 on the field. And I think in a lot of ways, the Falcons defensive line, whether you're looking at the defensive ends and the nose tackles and the tackles and the, outside linebackers, it's just like, just get the, 4 or 5 best guys on the field. And I think with guys like Zach Harrison and Ruka Roro and Brandon Dorlus and Taquan Graham and, obviously you have Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata in the mix as well. You can just kind of figure out how these guys stack to see, who are kind of the best guys that can emerge. And I think that is something I'm definitely looking forward to, once we get to training camp, to see how those guys sort of stack themselves.
And Aaron, a lot of it might be dictated, and JD, Tori, I want you guys to chime in here as well. A lot of it may be dictated about how the Falcons move based on the fact that Calais Campbell has found an old kind of new home, if you will. Late last week, we found out that the University of Miami alum took his talents to South Beach, back to South Beach, and he'll play for the Dolphins this upcoming season. So let me follow up with that, Aaron. And like I said, Jarvis, Tori, you guys chime in as well. Were you surprised about that move for Calais? But also, since we're talking about defensive ends, what does his departure maybe mean for this team off the field, but also on?
Well, for me, I made peace a long time ago with Calais Campbell only being sort of a 1-year rental. I figured that was kind of the plan all along. If the Falcons season had probably gone a little bit better than it actually did, like we all hoped it would, I think that would have opened the door for him to potentially return as part of their sort of building process. But especially once you moved on from Arthur Smith and Ryan Nielsen, and we know that a big selling point for Calais Campbell was Ryan Nielsen. Another selling point for him was Desmond Ridder, and that did not seem like that was going to continue into the future. So all the reasons for why Calais Campbell said the previous year that he came to Atlanta were sort of out the window. And so it's just like, okay, like he's probably not coming back. And then you saw with the draft, them going heavy on some of those big DNs that you would assume would replace Calais Campbell. So it wasn't a shock to me to see Calais Campbell move on. It was just a question of, would he continue to play, where he would wind up. And, I think him landing in Miami is a great spot. It's obviously a homecoming for him. They've really added a bunch of sort of veteran, pass rushers like Shaq Barrett and others this offseason. So it sort of fits with what Miami wants. And so I think that's a good move for him. And, hopefully, he'll prosper there and, can finish out his NFL career wherever he decides to end up, if it's in Miami or he continues to want to play, strong.
I think with Calais, and honestly, I have nothing but respect for Calais. I enjoyed my time covering him and getting to know him immensely. The project that we did with his 100 sack, like career sack, will probably be one of my favorite projects I've ever done of my career, because of just like what that moment meant to him, and also the multiple organizations that he'd been with to this point. When it came to kind of his landing spot, if he didn't retire, I kind of thought that he was going to go back to Jacksonville with Ryan. He truly, I think, enjoyed Ryan Nielsen's vision for him and how he wanted to utilize him, and letting him play that D end position a bit more than what he had at previous stops. And I think that really mattered to him. And I was really kind of thinking this whole time, I was like, if he doesn't retire, he's going to go to Jacksonville. He'll follow Ryan Nielsen because he enjoyed working with Ryan Nielsen so much. But then to see Miami, I'm kind of like, okay, this to me feels, and I don't want to put words in his mouth because I haven't talked to him, I don't know, but like this feels like a full circle moment for him, where this is where he got his, like, his start as a collegiate player. It's where he wants to end. And I think the Miami defense could use someone like him. And I think it'd be really interesting to see how they do use him and what that rotation does look like. So I wish Calais Campbell nothing but the best. Hopefully we'll get to see him when we do go down to Miami. So for joint practices. So, I mean, he'll just have to deal with the heat now, because when we were there last time, he was like, dear God, it's so hot. And now that's going to be his new normal. So nothing but the best for Calais, for sure.
I think, to your point, Tori, excuse me. I feel like when you talk about getting up there in age as far as being a super vet, right? I hate to put it that way to make him seem so old, but I think familiarity is a big thing. And then with Anthony Weaver being down there, who was his DC in Baltimore, so I think that that synergy and this type of season that he had when he was with Baltimore, I feel like that makes sense for him. And obviously the homecoming piece, that makes a lot of sense as well. So and one thing I want to say about Calais, the dude is just ultimate pro. Like you just understand why he's been in the league so long and why he's been so productive, and then for and then of course head coaches being able to understand, like, hey, I don't have to practice every day because I understand what I need to do to be able to, specifically during the season, right? So there's a preservation method that I've been being able to do and be able to have and be able to be successful. So if we can synergize those two minds coming together, I feel like it'll be a perfect match. So, and I feel like Miami is a perfect match for him. And then of course the Falcons being that whole youth movement up front, which I really appreciate. I think this is going to be, it just made all the sense in the world that he kind of moved on.
Indeed. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the defensive side of the ball, any position groups, maybe one by one, separation, maybe during OTAs, but I think more intriguing are the position battles. We'll talk about that and what's next. Locked On Sports Today is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel and is programmed to bring you the biggest stories daily without all the noise. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Tori, we talked about the fact that, Free kind of mentioned it in the last segment. It's kind of tough to talk about what's going on up front because you don't see these guys in pads. So it's kind of difficult to see them at their best, doing their best. But one of the most intriguing, maybe position groups, and maybe what you can see a little bit of potentiality for, or have a little bit of interest and intrigue in, is maybe at the corner position. It's probably one of the few groups on the defensive side of the ball where we see a legit battle, at least on the other side, opposite AJ Terrell. So what have you seen so far? Kind of where do you think that's going to land and how things are going to ratchet up as far as the position battle at corner?
Yeah, I think that first off, you have to go back to the fact of the matter. The Falcons didn't really do a lot at the position, which I think was a big shock to a lot of people. I think a lot of people, when you looked at the needs of the Falcons team, it was, okay, you need depth at wide receiver, you need depth at defensive line, defensive end, and then also you need a true starter opposite AJ Terrell. And the Falcons didn't really spend a lot of time or a lot of capital, whether it be draft or free agency, on that position, which I thought was very interesting. But if you go back and listen to Raheem Morris, every single time he talked about how much he liked the guys who were already in the room, and almost kind of laying breadcrumbs a little bit for us to be a little bit more okay with the fact that they weren't going to go out and get anybody. But you're right that it really does feel like it is a true position battle for that position opposite AJ Terrell. And you're talking between Clark Phillips III and Mike Hughes. And over the course of the practices that we've been able to see, it really is those guys battling it out for that starting job. And what's interesting too is they also have Clark Phillips moving inside. So D. Alford is obviously who you would assume to be the starting nickel. But when Mike Hughes was out there on the outside, they had Clark Phillips in the inside. So they were doing a little bit of different things with the rotation and seeing a few different looks. But I really do think that this is something that we will see go all the way up to not only the start of the season, but probably a few games in, as they're trying to figure out, like, do you give Clark Phillips the chance in his second year, or do you go with someone who's a bit more established in Mike Hughes? I don't know. It's one of those things that's very much a toss-up between those guys right now. And training camp in those first few games of the season, I think, are going to be very, very telling the direction that the Falcons want to go when you're talking about what you do opposite AJ Terrell.
And Free, now that Tori mentioned it, let's throw the nickel position in there as well. And let's just kind of talk about that too, because you're absolutely right. That mix and how you utilize those players in opposite AJ Terrell and at that nickel position, I think she's right. Like, I think this might be one of those battles that we're talking about for a while, because of the fact that it's not just about kind of the players that Raheem Morris has to work with, but also the players that, in addition to who he has to work with, kind of how they're actually stacking up depending on where you put them at any given time or in any given sequence of plays. I think that's going to be important as well. And I think the third thing is kind of, and I'm having a Jarvis moment. I'm like the DC Lake, but whenever, thank you. But whenever, I think this is the opportunity for him as well. As a DC, his first year, he's just now having an opportunity to see how these guys are going to play and really how they're going to fit into the scheme that he wants to employ.
Yeah, first I want to acknowledge that we're now calling it a Jarvis moment. So that is moving forward. We're just going to keep that going. But yeah, I think the quarterback position is very intriguing. I think Tori nailed it. Like, there's going to probably be some combination of 3 guys out of the 4 guys that she mentioned, including, sort of AJ Terrell. Well, we know AJ Terrell is going to be there, but, D. Alford, Clark Phillips, Mike Hughes. And as Tori said, like, that may be a position that won't be fully settled when we get to the regular season, and sort of seeing how these guys, perform in that first month of the season where, they're going to face some challenges going up against the Eagles and the Chiefs and their passing attacks, not to mention the Steelers in week 1, is probably going to do potentially more to sort of settle that position than what we're going to see in training camp. But as far as the nickel is concerned, like, D. Alford has been, to me, a player that has consistently played well when he's gotten opportunities the last couple of years. But for whatever reason, like, it doesn't seem like the Falcons have been fully committed to this guy as our nickel cornerback, and he's sort of the unquestioned guy. And I think this summer does present him a golden opportunity with what you're talking about, T, with a new defensive coordinator. It's sort of a fresh start for him to sort of say, like, yeah, I'm definitely this nickel cornerback. I'm going to lock this position down for, the next 2 or so years that I'm on this rookie contract. And then you guys are going to, pay me that contract, and I'm going to be this sort of long term. So this is not just sort of year 3 for me. This is like year 1 of probably like 5 years where I'm going to be this nickel cornerback. And I think he has that golden opportunity right now. So I'm looking forward to see what D. Alford can now do kind of with this fresh start, because I think he's performed well enough under the 2 previous defensive coordinators to impress them, but it hasn't really led to him just sort of locking down that position. So I think this summer is going to be a great opportunity for him.
Yeah, and I think the only reason we're even talking about the corner opposite of AJ Terrell is because Clark Phillips is 5'9". Like, I seem like he's changed. I change his height every week, but I'm trying to give him the man some little credit here. So, because when you think about outside of the height, like, he has everything, right? The aggressiveness, the mindset to be able to go out there, say, I don't care if you beat me. This first play, like, that is totally out of my mind. But by the time that next snap comes up, and just from the aggressiveness and being able to make plays, being a playmaker, I just feel like he has all the traits. It's just that, hey, he's just not that tall. So if we're talking about him being in conversation, and obviously the Falcons respect what he's able to bring to the table from a talent standpoint, because they are cross-training him at that nickel spot. Because, hey, what if Mike Hughes does outperform him in training camp and he starts off as the starter, and then, D. Alford has issues or whatever, like Aaron mentioned? Because, I've always been a fan of D. Alford, especially given his story coming from the CFL and everything like that. So if there's seem to be always moments where, oh, D. Alford's not on the sideline. He's on the sidelines. What's going on? Why is he not playing? But I think overall, like Aaron mentioned, he has a really good opportunity to kind of solidify himself as that nickel guy. But if Clark Phillips just so happens to get beat out by Mike Hughes, we understand that, hey, he has the ability to play inside and out. And there's a lot of value when it comes to that, especially when you get into those down packages.
Yep. Yeah. And Tori, we don't talk a lot about this one. Obviously, on the free safety side, the Falcons are more than good to go with Jesse Bates III, but we don't talk nearly as much about what's going on at strong safety. And it may be because some may feel like, hey, Richie Grant's good to go in that position, but there's that DeMarco Hellams kind of lingering there. I mean, what are your thoughts on where defensive coordinator Lake might want to go in terms of that position? Because I think, like I said, I think that might be a position battle we don't talk about a lot, but could be intriguing as well.
You're exactly right. I think if you're not talking about the Richie Grant, DeMarco Hellams position battle, you're not paying attention to the secondary, because I really, really like what DeMarco Hellams did last year. And I think that he surprised a lot of people. I know that he spoke recently kind of talking about feeling like, oh, people didn't maybe give him enough credit for what he was at Alabama and what he could bring to the field, because he was a 7th round draft pick and no one really talked about it. So I think that when you saw that the Falcons were willing to get rid of Jalen Hawkins as quickly as they were last year, and you know, on to Micah Abernathy for depth, but DeMarco Hellams really solidified himself as a true rotation guy. And also, I mean, towards the end of the season was getting some starting reps. And I think that that's going to bleed over very heavily into what the Falcons are doing in training camp. I know that they're obviously, the way that they have been playing around with the secondary and the rotations in the secondary and the open practices that we've seen, DeMarco Hellams has gotten reps with Jesse Bates. So I don't think it's Richie Grant's spot 110%. I don't think that. I think DeMarco Hellams is really going to give him a run for his money, and you hope that elevates both of their play going into the season.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Free, on that position and that position battle?
Yeah, I think Tori nailed it. You know, I think that's going to be a real competition, and I think you can make a very compelling case that it's probably better for both DeMarco Hellams and Richie Grant that Hellams winds up winning that position. One of the hallmarks of Raheem Morris's scheme when he was in LA that we're expecting Jimmy Lake to port over here into Atlanta was playing a lot of cover 3. And I think DeMarco Hellams is kind of that perfect sort of cover 3 safety that can sort of drop down in the box and be a force against the run. And I think Richie Grant's strengths that he showed in the second half of the season after DeMarco Hellams sort of usurped his starting spot was, I think Richie Grant probably is better suited maybe to be that sort of dime safety that can come in because of his versatility to be able to line up in the slot, be able to cover tight ends, to play deep, play in the box. I think sort of more of a limited role for Richie Grant may make more sense for him as sort of a role player in that regard. So
you
I think
say specialized instead of limited, you know, like specialize his role a little bit, make it a little bit more clear to what his strengths are, to your point.
Yeah, so I think it totally makes sense if we walk away from training camp and Hellams is the starter and Richie Grant is more, as Tori said, that sort of specialist in certain packages where you can kind of take advantage of his versatility to do different things.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, this is very important for Richie because regardless of whether or not he's on the team in 2025, I feel like he going to the last year of his contract. He's a 2nd round pick. He doesn't have the extra year to kind of get that, you know, to kind of get a team a little bit more feel. And I even talked to him, you know, while we were at practice, like he's had 3 different defensive coordinators since he's been in the league. So it's kind of like, and he's talked about how that's kind of, he's been able to use that as his advantage, right? Because you've been able to understand different languages, you know, when it comes to, you know, defense and everything. But I feel like for him personally, he has to figure out what his role is going to be. Like it has to be clearly defined. Like Tori mentioned, you talk about specialization, right? Like you can make some good money and have a good career in the NFL being one of those specialized type players. So I feel like this is a big year for him. And I think he fully understands that. So yeah, I'll be interested to see kind of where he falls once, you know, that first game of the season against the Steelers roll around.
It'll be interesting. Thanks for stopping by the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. Be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, we're free and available wherever you download your podcasts. We'll see you tomorrow on the Atlanta Football Party, the Dogs edition.